My husband rang in the new year with champagne kisses and his secretary, while I rang it in seizing control of his entire multi-million-dollar empire. The look on his face when he realized I owned everything he'd built was absolutely priceless. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The crystal chandelier in our Millbrook Estates grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as I stood alone at 12:01 a.m., January 1st, watching the final guests of our annual New Year's Eve gala stumble toward their waiting cars. The evening had been perfect, at least on the surface. 200 of Riverside Valley's elite had toasted another successful year at Hamilton and Associates Architecture, the firm my husband Damien had built from nothing into the region's most prestigious design company. What none of them knew, what Damien himself wouldn't discover until morning, was that as they'd been counting down to midnight, I had been counting down to something far more significant. The moment I would become the sole owner of everything he held dear. Before we dive deeper into this story of strategic revenge and corporate takeover, let me ask you, where are you watching from tonight? If this tale of turning betrayal into business victory resonates with you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have something even more shocking in store. My name is Victoria Hamilton, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I was living the American dream. At 35, I had everything a woman could want: a stunning home in Willowbrook Heights, a successful interior design consultancy that perfectly complemented Damien's architectural firm, and what I thought was a loving marriage to one of the most ambitious men in Evergreen County. We were the power couple everyone envied, the ones who hosted charity galas and appeared on the covers of regional business magazines. But dreams, I learned, can shatter as easily as champagne flutes on marble floors. The revelation came 3 weeks before our New Year's Eve party, in the most mundane way possible. I was updating our shared business calendar. Damien and I had always maintained joint accounts for everything, a sign of trust I'd been proud of, when I noticed an unusual hotel charge on our corporate credit card. The Grandview Resort and Spa, a luxury retreat 2 hours north of our hometown of Riverside Valley. The date confused me initially. It was a weekend when Damien had claimed to be visiting potential clients in the neighboring city of Oakmont. My first instinct wasn't suspicion but concern. Had there been an emergency, a change of plans he'd forgotten to mention? I called the hotel, identifying myself as Mrs. Hamilton and explaining that I needed to verify a charge on our account. The helpful desk clerk was more than happy to confirm the details of our stay: a romantic weekend package for two, complete with couples massage and champagne service. The blood drained from my face as she continued cheerfully describing the amenities. Your husband and the lovely young woman with him seem to enjoy the presidential suite very much. We do hope you'll both return soon. I managed to thank her and hang up before my composure completely cracked. Damien had been at the Grandview, but not alone, and certainly not with me. I sat in my home office for what felt like hours, staring at the hotel charge on my laptop screen, trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. That evening, when Damien returned from what he claimed was a routine site inspection, I watched him carefully. He kissed me hello the same way he had for 8 years of marriage, asked about my day with the same interested tone, discussed our upcoming New Year's party with the same enthusiasm. If guilt existed within him, he hid it masterfully. Over the following days, I began paying attention in ways I never had before. I noticed how Damien's phone was always face down during dinner, how he'd developed a habit of taking calls in his study with the door closed, how certain client meetings seemed to run unusually late. Small things that I'd previously attributed to his growing success now took on darker meanings. The breaking point came when I discovered who his companion had been: Cassandra Wells, his 28-year-old executive assistant, the woman who'd been working late with him on important projects for the past 6 months. The same woman who'd helped me coordinate our New Year's Eve guest list just weeks earlier, smiling warmly as she suggested we serve the champagne at midnight.
The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been planning a celebration of another successful year for Hamilton and Associates, Damien had been planning his own private celebration with Cassandra. The New Year's Eve party that was meant to showcase our partnership had become the stage for their betrayal. But Cassandra and Damien had made one crucial mistake in their months of deception. In their passion and secrecy, they'd overlooked the most important detail of all, the very foundation of the business they were using as their playground. You see, what Damien had apparently forgotten in his rush to build his architectural empire was exactly how that empire had been funded. The initial investment that launched Hamilton and Associates hadn't come from his savings or a bank loan. It had come from my inheritance, the substantial trust fund left to me by my grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, a shrewd businesswoman who'd made her fortune in real estate development. When we'd married 8 years ago, I'd willingly invested my entire inheritance into Damien's dream, believing wholeheartedly in his vision and our partnership. In my love and trust, I'd insisted the business be structured as a joint venture, with both our names on every document, every contract, every asset. What Damien had chosen to conveniently forget was that while his name might be on the company letterhead, my name was on the ownership papers. My inheritance hadn't been a gift or a loan. It had been an investment that made me an equal partner in everything we'd built. As I sat in my office 3 weeks ago, staring at that hotel charge and processing the magnitude of his betrayal, a new kind of clarity began to emerge. The same business acumen that had been dormant during years of supporting Damien's ambitions suddenly awakened with crystalline focus. If Damien wanted to celebrate the new year with Cassandra, he was welcome to do so, but he would be celebrating as a man who'd lost everything he'd spent 8 years building. The next morning, I made the first of many phone calls that would change both our lives forever. My attorney, Helena Frost, had been my grandmother's lawyer and had handled the original paperwork when I'd invested in Hamilton and Associates. She knew every detail of our business structure, every clause in our partnership agreement. "Victoria," she said after I'd explained the situation, "I need you to understand exactly what you're considering. The legal framework exists for you to exercise full control, but once you begin this process, there's no going back." I looked out the window of her downtown office at the Riverside Valley skyline, dotted with buildings that bore Damien's architectural signature. In a few hours, he would return home, kiss me hello, and continue living the lie that our marriage had become. "Helena," I said quietly, "there's already no going back. He made that choice when he chose her. I'm simply choosing me." And with that decision, the countdown to Damien's downfall began. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. The Hamilton and Associates headquarters stood like a glass monument to ambition in downtown Riverside Valley, its 30-story tower reflecting the winter sun across the business district that Damien had helped reshape over the past 8 years. From my corner office on the 28th floor, I could see the entire empire we had built together. The mixed-use developments, the luxury condominiums, the commercial complexes that bore his architectural signature, and my financial foundation. The building itself told the story of our partnership, though few people knew the real details. The sleek marble lobby with its soaring ceilings and carefully curated art collection spoke of success and sophistication. The executive floors, where Damien maintained his corner office just 2 doors down from mine, hummed with the quiet efficiency of a company at the height of its influence. Every detail, from the imported Italian marble to the custom-designed conference rooms, had been carefully planned and flawlessly executed. What most people didn't realize was that every brick, every beam, every piece of glass in this tower had been purchased with Whitmore money. My grandmother's legacy transformed into Damien's crown jewel. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I stood at my office window that morning, 3 weeks before our annual New Year's Eve celebration. The very building where Damien conducted his affair was built on the foundation of my trust. The Hamilton and Associates offices occupied floors 25 through 30, with the top floor reserved for our private conference rooms and the executive dining area where we entertained our most important clients. The 29th floor housed the design teams and project managers, while the 28th floor, my floor, contained the administrative offices, including Cassandra's workspace just outside Damien's door. From where I stood, I could see into the outer office where Cassandra sat at her sleek modern desk, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her attention seemingly focused on her computer screen. She wore a burgundy dress that I recognized. It was from the same designer boutique where I shopped, though I suspected Damien had been the one funding her increasingly expensive wardrobe. The thought should have made me angry, but instead it filled me with a cold clarity that I found oddly comforting. The walls of my office were lined with architectural awards and community recognition plaques, testament to the charitable work and civic involvement that had made Hamilton and Associates not just successful, but respected. The Riverside Valley Business Excellence Award, the Evergreen County Humanitarian Recognition, the Regional Architecture Innovation Prize, each one representing years of careful relationship building and strategic positioning that I had orchestrated, while Damien focused on the creative work. My grandmother's portrait hung behind my desk, a reminder of where this empire had truly begun. Eleanor Whitmore had been a force of nature in the development world, building shopping centers and office complexes, when women in business were still regarded as curiosities. She had taught me that success wasn't just about having money. It was about understanding how to leverage that money into power, influence, and control. "Never put all your eggs in someone else's basket, Victoria," she had told me during one of our long summer afternoons at her estate. "And if you do choose to share your resources, make sure you maintain control of the basket itself." At the time, young and in love, I thought her advice was old-fashioned, a relic of a more cynical era. I believed that true partnership meant complete trust, complete transparency. I had wanted Damien and me to be equals in every sense, building something together that neither of us could have achieved alone. Looking back now, I realized that we had achieved exactly that, though perhaps not in the way I had originally envisioned. Damien had brought the creative vision, the architectural brilliance, the ability to transform raw space into something beautiful and functional. I had brought the capital, the business acumen, the strategic thinking that turned creative vision into commercial success. The difference was that while I had never forgotten that this partnership was built on mutual respect and shared goals, Damien had apparently decided that his contributions were more valuable than mine. Somewhere along the way, he had begun to see my role as purely financial, the money woman who enabled his artistic genius rather than an equal partner in every aspect of our success. The December air outside was crisp and clear, with a kind of bright winter light that made the city below sparkle like a crystal display. Snow had dusted the rooftops overnight, creating a picturesque scene that would have been perfect for the holiday marketing materials we typically release this time of year. In a few hours, Damien would return from his lunch meeting, or what he claimed was a lunch meeting, and we would review the final preparations for our New Year's Eve party. The guest list read like a who's who of regional power brokers: Mayor Thompson from Riverside Valley, County Commissioner Patricia Wild, the CEOs of our 3 largest development partners, the heads of the planning commissions from 4 surrounding municipalities. These were the relationships that had taken years to cultivate, the connections that had transformed Hamilton and Associates from a promising startup into the dominant force in regional architecture and development. What many of these guests didn't realize was that while they saw Damien as the face of the company, the real power had always rested with the person who controlled the financial foundation. My grandmother had taught me to build networks quietly, to wield influence without drawing attention to myself. While Damien gave interviews and accepted awards, I had been cultivating relationships with bank presidents, zoning officials, and permit coordinators. The view from my office window encompassed not just our architectural achievements, but the entire ecosystem of power and influence that we had spent 8 years constructing. The Riverside Valley Municipal Building, where our projects received priority consideration. The Evergreen County Courthouse, where our legal challenges were handled with unusual speed and favorable outcomes. The offices of the regional newspaper, where our community involvement earned us positive coverage that money couldn't buy. All of this, every relationship, every advantage, every carefully constructed element of our success, had been built on the foundation of my investment and my strategic thinking. Damien might have designed the buildings, but I had designed the empire. As I stood there that morning, watching Cassandra answer phones and schedule appointments for the man she was secretly sleeping with, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal that had consumed me for the past week began to crystallize into something harder, more focused. This wasn't just about a cheating husband anymore. This was about a man who had taken my trust, my money, and my partnership, and decided they weren't enough. Who had looked at everything we had built together, and decided he deserved more than half. The January wind rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, but inside, the temperature-controlled environment remained perfectly stable. Just like everything else in this building, the climate was carefully managed and controlled. It occurred to me that managing the climate of our business relationship would require the same kind of precise attention to detail. My phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "Running late from client lunch. Start the party planning review without me. I'll catch up when I get back." I smiled, setting the phone down on my desk next to the hotel receipt I had printed out that morning. The Grandview Resort and Spa charge sat there like a ticking bomb, waiting for the right moment to explode the carefully constructed facade of our marriage. But timing, as my grandmother had always taught me, was everything. The New Year's Eve party was 3 weeks away. That gave me exactly enough time to ensure that when Damien's world finally crumbled, I would be the one holding all the pieces. I wasn't always the kind of woman who could dismantle a man's empire with surgical precision. 3 weeks ago, I was Victoria Hamilton, the supportive wife who attended charity luncheons and design showcases, who smiled graciously at business dinners while my husband took credit for visions that were equally mine. I was the woman who had spent 8 years believing that love meant putting someone else's dreams before your own, that partnership meant stepping into the shadows so your spouse could shine in the spotlight. But as I sat in my office that December morning, studying the hotel receipt that had shattered my world, I realized that woman was gone. In her place sat someone harder, more calculating, someone who had inherited not just my grandmother's money but her ruthless business instincts. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been building for months, perhaps years, waiting for the right catalyst to set it free. My reflection in the office window showed a woman who looked exactly the same as she had 3 weeks ago. Shoulder-length auburn hair, styled in the sophisticated bob that photographed well at corporate events. Emerald eyes that Damien had once said reminded him of old money and new possibilities. The kind of understated elegance that came from growing up with wealth but learning to wield it responsibly. At 5'6", I carried myself with the confident posture that 8 years of marriage to an ambitious man had taught me. Straight spine, composed expression, the ability to project calm authority even when chaos threatened to consume everything around me. But the woman looking back at me from that window was someone entirely different from the person who had walked down the aisle 8 years ago in grandmother's vintage lace gown, believing she was entering a partnership of equals. That Victoria had been naive enough to think that trust was the foundation of a successful marriage. This Victoria understood that trust was a luxury that could be weaponized against you by those closest to your heart. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was experiencing this revelation while sitting in an office that existed because of my own financial foundation. My interior design consultancy, Hamilton Design Concepts, occupied the southwest corner of the 28th floor, connected to but separate from Damien's architectural firm. The space reflected my aesthetic preferences. Clean lines softened by carefully chosen textures, neutral colors accented with bold artwork from local artists, furniture that was both beautiful and functional. Unlike Damien's office, which was designed to impress clients and competitors with its display of awards and architectural models, my space was designed for actual work. The long drafting table where I created mood boards and space plans, the library of fabric samples and material specifications, the computer setup where I managed project timelines and client communications, everything was arranged for maximum efficiency and creative flow. What most people didn't realize was that Hamilton Design Concepts wasn't just a complementary business to Damien's architecture firm. My interior design work was often the deciding factor in whether potential clients chose Hamilton & Associates over our competitors. When developers needed to envision how their spaces would feel, not just how they would look, they came to me. When city planning committees wanted to understand the human impact of proposed projects, they relied on my presentations. My work didn't just make Damien's buildings more beautiful, it made them more profitable. The client files arranged on my desk told the story of a woman who had built her own success while supporting her husband's ambitions. The Riverside Valley Medical Center project, where my healing-focused interior design had been instrumental in securing the $40 million contract. The Evergreen County Justice Complex, where my understanding of public space psychology had helped Hamilton and Associates beat out 3 larger firms. The Willowbrook Heights residential development, where my luxury interior concepts had allowed Damien to charge premium prices for units that might otherwise have been considered standard. Each project represented not just professional achievement, but strategic positioning. Every satisfied client became a reference for future work. Every successful collaboration strengthened our reputation in the regional market. I hadn't just been decorating Damien's architectural visions. I had been building the business relationships and client loyalty that formed the real foundation of our success. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Patricia Carlisle, one of our most important clients and the developer behind 3 major projects currently in our pipeline. Patricia was old-school Riverside Valley money, the kind of woman who had inherited her father's real estate empire and expanded it through careful partnerships and strategic investments. "Victoria, darling," Patricia's cultured voice came through the speaker. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial, but I wanted to discuss the timeline for the Oakmont Commons project. The City Council is getting nervous about the holiday delays." I pulled up the project file on my computer, scanning the development schedule that I had personally coordinated with 4 different municipal departments. Patricia were actually ahead of schedule on the design phase. Damien's team completed the architectural revisions last week, and my interior specifications are ready for the city's approval. Wonderful. And what about the zoning variance for the residential component? I know that's been a sticking point with the Planning Commission. I smiled, remembering the lunch meeting I had arranged with Commissioner Thompson just 2 days ago, carefully laying the groundwork for a favorable decision. Already handled. The variance application will be approved at next week's meeting. I've made sure all the necessary parties understand the economic benefits to the community. Patricia's pleased laughter filled my office. This is exactly why I insist on working with Hamilton and Associates. You anticipate problems before they become crises. Your husband is brilliant, of course, but you're the one who makes everything actually happen. After Patricia hung up, I sat back in my chair, considering her words. Your husband is brilliant, but you're the one who makes everything actually happen. How many times had I heard variations of that sentiment over the years? How many clients had quietly acknowledged that while they hired Damien for his creative vision, they relied on me for execution, problem-solving, and relationship management? The thought led me to open the locked drawer of my desk, where I kept the most sensitive business documents. Inside was a folder that I had been unconsciously building for months. Copies of client contracts that listed me as the primary contact, email chains where municipal officials addressed their questions directly to me rather than Damien, meeting notes where major decisions had been made based on my recommendations rather than his designs. I hadn't created this documentation with any particular purpose in mind. It had simply been my habit to keep thorough records of all business interactions. But as I reviewed the contents now, a pattern emerged that I had never consciously acknowledged. While Damien was the public face of Hamilton and Associates, I was increasingly the operational heart. Clients might come to us because of his reputation, but they stayed because of my service. The realization was both empowering and sobering. For 8 years, I had told myself that we were equal partners building something together. The truth was more complex and more interesting. We had indeed built something together, but the foundation was stronger on my side than I had ever realized. My computer chimed with a calendar reminder about the staff meeting scheduled for later that afternoon. Every Friday, Damien and I met with our key employees to review active projects and coordinate upcoming deadlines. These meetings were one of the few times each week when our partnership was on full display, when the complementary nature of our skills was most obvious to our team. Today's meeting would include Cassandra, of course, along with our lead project manager, Martin Rivers, and our senior designer, Rachel Chen. As I mentally prepared for the discussion of project timelines and client requirements, I found myself wondering how many of these Friday meetings had concluded with Damien and Cassandra finding excuses to work late together. How many overtime hours had been billed to our clients while they conducted their personal business in conference rooms that I had helped design and furnish? The anger that accompanied this thought surprised me with its intensity, not jealousy. That was too small an emotion for what I was feeling. This was something deeper and more focused. Rage at the violation of professional boundaries, fury at the abuse of resources and relationships that we had built together. Damien hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had corrupted the business that was supposed to be our shared legacy. Standing up from my desk, I walked to the window again, looking out at the city that had become our kingdom. In a few hours, I would sit across from Cassandra in our conference room, discussing project deadlines and client requirements while pretending I didn't know she was sleeping with my husband. I would watch Damien facilitate the meeting with his usual charm and competence, all while planning strategy for his destruction. The woman who would attend that meeting wasn't the trusting wife who had discovered the hotel receipt 3 weeks ago. She was someone harder, someone who understood that love was a luxury and trust was a weapon. She was someone who had inherited more than money from Eleanor Whitmore. She had inherited the killer instinct that built empires and destroyed those who threatened them. As I returned to my desk to prepare for the afternoon's performance, I felt something settle into place inside me, like the final piece of a complex architectural structure finding its proper position. The foundation was solid, the framework was strong, and the demolition was about to begin. The memory hit me with unexpected clarity as I prepared for that afternoon's staff meeting. Damien and I, standing in the half-finished shell of what would become our first major commercial project, hard hats perched awkwardly on our heads, reviewing blueprints by the harsh light of construction lamps. It was 2016, 3 years into our marriage, and 2 years after we'd launched Hamilton & Associates with my grandmother's inheritance money. The project was the Riverside Valley Community Arts Center, a $30 million venture that would either establish us as serious players in the regional architecture market or bankrupt us before we'd truly begun. I had been terrified. Despite my MBA from Northwestern and years of working in my grandmother's real estate empire, this felt impossibly large, impossibly risky. But Damien had been electric with confidence, his eyes bright with the kind of visionary passion that had first attracted me to him at that gallery opening 10 years earlier. "Victoria, look at this space," he had said, gesturing toward the soaring ceiling that would eventually house the main theater. "Can you see it? The way light will move through here during a matinee performance, the way families will gather in the lobby before shows, creating memories that will last generations." I could see it not just because of his description, but because I understood how spaces could shape human experience. While Damien envisioned the architectural drama, I was already planning the interior flow, the color palettes that would make visitors feel welcomed rather than intimidated, the lighting design that would transition smoothly from day to evening events. Together, we weren't just designing a building, we were creating an experience. That collaboration had defined the early years of our marriage and business partnership. Damien brought the creative vision and technical expertise. I brought the financial backing, business strategy, and psychological understanding of how people actually used spaces. He could design a beautiful conference room, but I knew how to arrange the furniture so that negotiations would proceed smoothly. He could create stunning residential spaces, but I understood which finishes would appeal to different demographic groups. The Arts Center had been our proving ground, the project that demonstrated we could work together as seamlessly in business as we did in marriage. When cost overruns threatened the timeline, I had negotiated with suppliers and subcontractors, leveraging relationships I'd inherited from my grandmother's network. When the city council expressed concerns about the building's impact on traffic patterns, I had presented a comprehensive study showing how the center would actually improve the downtown district's evening economy. Most importantly, when the project faced a potential crisis over union labor requirements that could have added $2 million to our costs, I had found the solution that saved both money and political capital. My grandmother had taught me that in business, as in life, there was almost always a third option that satisfied everyone's core interests without requiring anyone to lose face. The success of the Arts Center had led to bigger projects, more ambitious visions, and the gradual building of what became our regional empire. But it had also established a pattern that I was only now beginning to recognize. Damien created, I executed. Damien inspired, I problem-solved. Damien received accolades, I made sure the work actually got done. At the time, this division of labor had felt natural, even optimal. We each played to our strengths, and together we achieved more than either of us could have managed alone. I told myself that I preferred working behind the scenes, that I found satisfaction in being the strategic mind behind Damien's public successes. When local magazines featured him on their covers as Riverside Valley's visionary architect, I felt proud of our shared accomplishment. But somewhere along the way, the balance had shifted. Damien began to believe his own press, to see himself as the sole source of our success rather than half of a carefully orchestrated partnership. He started making unilateral decisions about major projects, presenting me with fait accompli rather than including me in the planning process. Client meetings that had once been collaborative efforts became performances where I played the supporting role to his star turn. The change had been so gradual that I hadn't recognized it as a pattern until much later. A comment here about how I worried too much about details, a suggestion there that perhaps I should focus more on the interior design work and leave the big picture business decisions to him. He never said anything overtly dismissive, but slowly and systematically he had begun to marginalize my input while continuing to benefit from my financial investment and business connections. Looking back, I could trace the evolution of our relationship through the projects we'd completed together. The Arts Center in 2016, where we'd been true partners. The Willowbrook Heights residential development in 2017, where my market research had been crucial, but Damien had handled most of the client presentations. The Regional Medical Center in 2019, where I'd done most of the behind-the-scenes negotiating, but he'd received sole credit in the local press. By 2022, the pattern was firmly established. I provided the foundation, he built the reputation. I solved the problems, he claimed the victories. I invested the money and managed the relationships, he gave the interviews and accepted the awards. The most insidious part was how he had convinced me that this arrangement was not only natural but beneficial for both of us. "You're so much better at the detail work, Victoria," he would say when I questioned why I wasn't included in certain high-profile meetings. "I handle the creative vision and client relations. You make sure everything actually happens. We're the perfect team." And I had believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I loved him and trusted that our partnership was built on mutual respect, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. Because challenging the arrangement would have required acknowledging that the man I'd married was systematically diminishing my role in our shared success. The relationship had started so differently. When we'd met at that gallery opening in Chicago in 2013, I had been 27 years old and recently graduated from Northwestern's business school, working as a development consultant for my grandmother's real estate company. Damien was 29, a junior architect at a prestigious firm, brilliant and ambitious, but frustrated by the limitations of working for someone else's vision. He had approached me as I stood studying a photograph of the Willis Tower taken from an unusual angle, showing the iconic building reflected in the glass facade of a newer structure. "The interesting thing about that shot," he had said, "is how it shows that architecture is never really finished. Every building becomes part of the context for the next one." The observation had struck me as both intelligent and romantic, a perfect encapsulation of how I thought about business and life. Every decision created the foundation for future possibilities. We had spent the rest of the evening discussing everything from urban planning philosophy to our shared love of historical renovation projects. By our third date, Damien was sharing his dreams of starting his own firm, creating architecture that would improve communities rather than just impressing other architects. I had been captivated by his passion, but also by his practical understanding of what it would take to turn vision into reality. He wasn't just another creative type with impossible dreams. He had a genuine business plan, realistic projections, and a clear understanding of market opportunities. When he'd proposed 8 months later, it had felt like the natural evolution of a partnership that was already flourishing on multiple levels. We weren't just falling in love. We were building something together that was larger than either of us individually. The decision to combine our lives had seemed inseparable from the decision to combine our professional ambitions. My grandmother had been skeptical, though she'd kept her concerns largely to herself. "He's charming, intelligent, and ambitious," she'd said during one of our private conversations at her Lake Geneva estate. "But watch carefully to see whether he views you as a partner or as a particularly valuable asset." Sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference until it's too late. I had dismissed her warnings as generational cynicism, the perspective of a woman who had built her fortune during an era when gender dynamics in business were far more overtly hostile. Damien wasn't like the men of my grandmother's generation. He encouraged my career, supported my education, respected my intelligence. We were equals, building something together. Except we weren't equals, and apparently never had been. Damien had simply been more sophisticated in his approach to leveraging my resources than the crude methods my grandmother had encountered in her own career. Instead of openly dismissing my contributions, he had gradually repositioned them as support services for his primary work. Instead of demanding I step aside, he had convinced me to step back voluntarily. The revelation of his affair with Cassandra wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was the final confirmation of how he really viewed our partnership. I wasn't his equal. I was his enabler. I wasn't his business partner. I was his financier and problem solver. And when he grew bored with the professional relationship, apparently it was only natural that he would seek more stimulating companionship elsewhere. As I sat in my office that December afternoon, reviewing the architectural drawings for our latest project, I realized that Damien had made one crucial miscalculation in his gradual marginalization of my role. He had assumed that because I had allowed him to take credit for our shared successes, I had somehow forgotten that the successes were, in fact, shared. But I remembered everything, every contract I had negotiated, every relationship I had cultivated, every crisis I had resolved, while he focused on the more glamorous aspects of our work. More importantly, I remembered exactly who owned what, who owed whom, and where the real power in our partnership actually resided. The foundation he had built his reputation on was still mine, and foundations, I was about to remind him, could be shifted without warning. The first crack in my carefully constructed world appeared on a Tuesday morning in early December, hidden in something as mundane as our shared corporate American Express statement. I was reviewing the monthly expenses in preparation for our year-end financial planning, a task I had taken over completely after our accountant, Bernard Walsh, had commented that I had an exceptional eye for detail and cost control that keeps this operation profitable. I had developed a systematic approach to expense review over the years, categorizing charges by project, client, and purpose. Travel expenses for client meetings were coded differently from materials purchases, which were separate from entertainment costs. It was methodical work that most people found tedious, but I enjoyed the clarity it provided about how our money was actually being spent, versus how we planned to spend it. The Grandview Resort and Spa charge jumped out at me immediately, not because of the amount, though $2,847 for a weekend was certainly substantial, but because of the timing. The charge was dated November 15th through 17th, a weekend when Damien had told me he was attending the Regional Architecture Symposium in Oakmont, 3 hours north of Riverside Valley. I clearly remembered the conversation because I had offered to accompany him, thinking it might be nice to make a weekend getaway out of the professional obligation. "It's going to be incredibly boring, sweetheart," he had said, not even looking up from the project drawings he was reviewing at our kitchen island. "Nothing but technical presentations and networking events. You'd hate every minute of it. Besides, you mentioned wanting to finish that interior design proposal for the Morrison project." He had been right about the Morrison proposal. It was a complex residential renovation that required careful attention to historical preservation guidelines. But his dismissive assumption that I would find an architecture symposium boring had stung more than I'd admitted at the time. I held an MBA and had been working in architecture-adjacent fields for over a decade. I was hardly some dilettante who couldn't appreciate professional development opportunities. Now, staring at the Grandview Resort charge, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The Grandview was a luxury destination spa, the kind of place couples went for romantic weekends, not the sort of venue that typically hosted professional conferences. I opened my laptop and searched for information about the Regional Architecture Symposium, finding the official website within minutes. The 2024 symposium had indeed taken place November 15th through 17th, but not at the Grandview Resort. It had been held at the Oakmont Convention Center, a distinctly unglamorous venue known for its efficient meeting spaces and budget-friendly accommodations for professional events. Moreover, the symposium's hotel recommendations included 3 modestly priced chain hotels within walking distance of the convention center. The Grandview Resort wasn't even mentioned as an option. My hands remained steady as I picked up my phone and dialed the Grandview's main number, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. The trusting wife who had started reviewing expense reports an hour earlier was being replaced by someone harder, more suspicious, more alert to inconsistencies and lies. Grandview Resort and Spa, this is Amanda. How may I assist you today? The cheerful voice on the other end seemed to come from a different universe than the one I was now inhabiting. Hello, this is Victoria Hamilton. I'm calling to verify a charge on our corporate account from November 15th through 17th. I believe my husband stayed with you that weekend, and I need to confirm some details for our expense reporting. Of course, Mrs. Hamilton. Let me pull up that reservation. I heard the soft clicking of computer keys, followed by a pause that seemed to stretch for eternity. Yes, I have the reservation here. A wonderful weekend package for you and Mr. Hamilton. The staff mentioned what a lovely couple you made. The words hit me like physical blows, but I managed to keep my voice level. I'm sorry, there seems to be some confusion. I wasn't there that weekend. Could you describe the woman who was with my husband? Another pause, this one more uncomfortable. Oh my. I don't think I should really. Is there perhaps some mistake about the dates? No mistake about the dates, I said quietly. Could you please describe her? It's important. Amanda's voice became smaller, more hesitant. She was quite young, maybe late 20s. Blonde hair, very pretty. They seemed very affectionate. They requested our premium couples package with the private hot tub and massage services for two. I thanked Amanda and hung up, my mind immediately conjuring an image of Cassandra Wells with her perfectly styled blonde hair and her habit of touching Damien's arm during meetings while discussing urgent project details. The description fit perfectly, horribly, undeniably. For several minutes, I sat motionless at my desk, staring at the computer screen where the Grandview's website displayed images of romantic suites and couple spa treatments. Everything about the resort screamed intimate getaway, from the heart-shaped hot tubs to the champagne and chocolate packages offered to guests. This wasn't the kind of place you went alone, and it certainly wasn't the kind of place you went with a business colleague, unless that colleague was significantly more than a colleague. The rational part of my mind tried to construct alternative explanations. Perhaps there had been a scheduling conflict with the symposium accommodations. Perhaps Cassandra had been attending the same professional event, and they had coincidentally ended up at the same resort. Perhaps the desk clerk had been mistaken about their apparent intimacy. But even as I generated these possibilities, I knew they were desperate attempts to avoid confronting an obvious truth. The truth that my husband of 8 years had spent a romantic weekend at a luxury spa resort with his 28-year-old assistant while lying to me about attending a professional conference. The truth that the man I had trusted with my heart, my money, and my professional reputation had been conducting an affair literally on our corporate dime. I opened a new browser window and searched for information about Cassandra Wells, something I had never thought to do before despite working closely with her for over 2 years. Her LinkedIn profile revealed that she had joined Hamilton and Associates in March 2022, approximately 18 months ago. Before that, she had worked as an administrative assistant at 2 different small firms, neither of which would have provided the kind of sophisticated business experience that her current position required. This raised another disturbing question. Why had Damien hired someone with relatively limited experience for such a crucial role? Cassandra's position as executive assistant gave her access to confidential client information, project timelines, and financial data. It was a job that typically required several years of relevant experience and unquestionable discretion. I pulled up her original job application from our HR files, reviewing the resume and references that I had apparently approved without paying much attention. The picture that emerged was of an attractive young woman with adequate but not exceptional qualifications, who had somehow convinced Damien that she was the ideal candidate for a position that typically attracted much more experienced applicants. Looking at her employee photo now, professional headshot showing her bright smile and fashionably tousled blonde hair, I realized I had been incredibly naive about the dynamics developing right under my nose. Cassandra's frequent requests to work late on urgent projects that seemed to coincide with Damien's own overtime hours. her habit of scheduling strategy meetings that required private conference room sessions, her increasing confidence in offering opinions about business decisions that were well outside her area of expertise. The signs had been there for months, perhaps even since she'd started working for us. I had simply been too trusting, too focused on my own work, too comfortable in my marriage to recognize what was happening. While I had been managing client relationships and solving business problems, Damien had been conducting an affair with breathtaking boldness, literally under my nose and on my dime. My phone buzzed with a text message from Damien. Strategy session with Cassandra running long. Don't wait up if I'm late getting home. Big presentation tomorrow. The casual lie, delivered with such practiced ease, confirmed everything the hotel charge had suggested. There was no big presentation tomorrow. I managed our calendar and would have known about any major client meetings. This was simply the latest in what I now realized was probably a long series of fabricated excuses designed to create opportunities for him to spend time with Cassandra. I screenshot the text message and saved it to a new folder on my computer labeled Documentation. Something told me I was going to need evidence of everything: the lies, the expense account abuse, the systematic deception that had apparently been going on for months while I remained obliviously focused on our business success.
As I sat there in my office, watching the December sun set over the city we had helped reshape, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The woman who had started her day reviewing routine business expenses was gone, replaced by someone who understood that her marriage, her business partnership, and her financial future were all under attack from the person she had trusted most. The game had changed completely. I just wasn't sure Damien realized it yet. Once I knew what to look for, the evidence was everywhere. The hotel charge at the Grandview had been just the tip of an iceberg that had been growing beneath the surface of our marriage for months, maybe longer. As I sat in my office that evening, long after the building had emptied and the winter darkness had settled over Riverside Valley, I began the methodical process of excavating the truth about my own life. I started with our shared calendar, the digital lifeline that had coordinated our professional and personal schedules for 8 years. Opening the last 6 months of entries, I began cross-referencing Damien's reported activities with actual business requirements, client meetings, and project deadlines. What I discovered was a pattern of deception so systematic and extensive that it took my breath away. The Regional Architecture Symposium weekend was far from an isolated incident. In September, Damien had claimed to attend a 3-day sustainable design conference in Chicago, while our credit card showed charges at the Lakeshore Boutique Hotel, a romantic retreat known for its couples' wellness packages, rather than professional development opportunities. In August, a supposed client site visit to Milwaukee had generated charges at the historic Pfister Hotel's spa and fine dining restaurant, expenses that seemed excessive for a routine project inspection. Each false business trip had been carefully crafted with just enough professional legitimacy to avoid suspicion. There really was a sustainable design conference in Chicago that September, though it had been held at the McCormick Place Convention Center, not at the Lakeshore Boutique Hotel. The Milwaukee client site did exist, but a simple phone call to the project manager revealed that no site visit had been scheduled or requested during the dates in question. What made Damien's deception particularly sophisticated was how he had layered truth with lies, creating alibis that would withstand casual scrutiny while hiding the real purpose of his travels. He hadn't invented conferences or client meetings from whole cloth. He had simply used real professional events as cover for personal getaways with Cassandra. The expense patterns told their own story. Romantic restaurants, couple spa treatments, premium hotel suites, wine tastings, and shopping excursions, all charged to our corporate account and carefully categorized as business development or client entertainment expenses. Over the past 6 months alone, I calculated that Damien and Cassandra had charged nearly $30,000 in personal expenses to Hamilton and Associates. Money that had ultimately come from my grandmother's inheritance, and the profits generated by my own work. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. As I delved deeper into our business records, I discovered that Damien had been systematically positioning Cassandra for increased responsibility and decision-making authority within the company. Her salary had been increased twice in 18 months, jumping from $45,000 to $72,000, despite her limited experience and the fact that she was still technically an executive assistant. More disturbing was the discovery that Damien had granted Cassandra access to our most sensitive business systems, client databases, project management software, financial reporting tools, and even our banking platforms. This level of access was typically reserved for senior partners, not administrative staff. It suggested that Damien was either planning to formally promote Cassandra to a management position or was grooming her to potentially take over aspects of the business that I currently controlled. I found evidence of private meetings between Damien and Cassandra that had never appeared on our official calendar, appointments that she had apparently scheduled directly through her personal phone rather than our standard booking system. The timestamps on various documents showed that many of these meetings occurred during hours when I was typically out of the office handling client presentations or municipal meetings, times when they would have had complete privacy in our executive suite.
The paper trail revealed something even more concerning. Damien had been gradually shifting key business relationships away from my direct management and toward Cassandra's oversight. Vendor contracts that I had historically negotiated were now being handled through her office. Client communications that had traditionally come to me were being redirected to her attention. Slowly but systematically, Damien was transferring operational control of our business away from me and toward his mistress. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a personal affair. It was a calculated business strategy designed to marginalize my role in the company I had helped create and fund. While I had been focused on growing our client base and maintaining our professional reputation, Damien had been orchestrating a corporate coup that would eventually leave me as a silent financial partner rather than an active business leader. I discovered email threads between Damien and several major clients, where he had begun describing himself as the founding principal of Hamilton and Associates, making no mention of my role as co-founder and primary investor. In one particularly galling exchange with Patricia Carlisle about the Oakmont Commons project, he had referred to me as our talented interior design consultant, rather than acknowledging my status as an equal partner in the firm. The linguistic shift was subtle but significant. By repositioning me as a consultant rather than a partner, Damien was laying the groundwork for a narrative in which his departure from our marriage wouldn't necessarily affect his control of the business. In his revised version of our company's history, I was an important service provider rather than a founding owner, someone whose contributions were valuable but not essential to the firm's continued operation. This realization led me to examine our legal documents more carefully than I had in years. The original partnership agreement, drafted when we established Hamilton and Associates in 2015, clearly designated both Damien and me as equal partners with identical decision-making authority and ownership stakes. But as I reviewed subsequent amendments and additions to our corporate structure, I discovered that several changes had been made without my full understanding of their implications. In 2019, when we had restructured the company to take advantage of certain tax benefits, Damien had convinced me to sign documents that created a more complex ownership hierarchy. At the time, he had explained the changes as purely administrative, designed to optimize our financial efficiency and provide better protection against potential litigation. I had trusted his judgment and signed without scrutinizing the details. Now reading the documents with suspicious eyes rather than trusting ones, I realized that the 2019 restructuring had created mechanisms by which operational control of the company could potentially be separated from ownership stakes. While I remain the majority financial stakeholder, day-to-day management authority had been concentrated in the role of managing principal, a position that Damien had assumed as a matter of course. The legal framework was complex enough that extracting myself from the partnership or asserting control over business operations wouldn't be a simple matter of pointing to my original investment. Damien had been far more strategic in his planning than I had given him credit for, creating corporate structures that would protect his interests even if our marriage dissolved. But as I sat there in my darkened office, surrounded by evidence of months of systematic deception and manipulation, I realized that Damien had made one crucial miscalculation in his elaborate scheme. He had been so focused on protecting his position within Hamilton and Associates that he had overlooked the broader financial landscape that supported our entire operation. The corporate restructuring that had given him operational control had been predicated on the assumption that our business relationships, client base, and municipal connections would remain stable regardless of changes in our personal partnership. What Damien had failed to consider was that many of those relationships existed because of my work, my networking, my grandmother's legacy connections, and my ongoing management of key accounts. More importantly, he had apparently forgotten that the building which housed our offices, the equipment we used, and even some of our largest contracts existed because of financial guarantees and collateral that traced back to my personal assets and family trusts. While Damien might have operational control of Hamilton and Associates, the foundation that supported the entire operation remained firmly under my authority. As I finally gathered the scattered documents and closed my laptop near midnight, I felt something shift inside me that was more profound than anger or hurt. It was the crystallization of understanding, not just about what Damien had done, but about what I was capable of doing in response. He had been playing a long game, carefully positioning himself to maintain control of our business while pursuing his affair with Cassandra. But he had been playing that game according to rules that I had helped establish, in an arena that I had helped create, with resources that ultimately belonged to me. It was time to remind him that I knew how to play games too. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years, not because I was ill, but because I needed 18 uninterrupted hours to transform from a betrayed wife into a strategic adversary. While Damien believed I was home nursing a supposed migraine, I was actually 40 miles away in the downtown offices of Whitmore and Associates, the legal firm that had managed my grandmother's business affairs and still oversaw the complex trust structures that formed the foundation of my personal wealth. Harrison Whitmore III, my grandmother's former attorney and my current legal counsel, was a silver-haired gentleman in his 60s who possessed the kind of old money discretion that made him invaluable for sensitive family matters. His office, located in a restored 19th century mansion that exuded understated power, had been where my grandmother had planned her most decisive business moves. Today it would serve the same purpose for me. "Victoria," Harrison said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, "this is an unexpected pleasure, though your voice on the phone suggested this isn't a social call." I had known Harrison since childhood, and he had guided me through the legal complexities of investing my inheritance in Hamilton and Associates 8 years earlier. He was one of the few people who understood exactly how our business was structured and where the real power lay within our corporate hierarchy. "Harrison, I need to understand something about the 2019 restructuring of Hamilton and Associates. Specifically, I need to know what options are available to me if I decide that my business partnership with Damien is no longer viable." His eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. Harrison had been practicing law long enough to recognize the difference between a hypothetical question and a strategic consultation. "Before we proceed, I should ask whether you're speaking about business disagreements or whether there are personal considerations that might affect the professional relationship." "Both," I said simply. "I've discovered that Damien has been conducting an affair with one of our employees for at least 6 months, possibly longer. More concerning from a business perspective, he's been using corporate funds to finance this relationship and has been systematically positioning his mistress to assume responsibilities that should rightfully be mine." Harrison's expression darkened as I outlined the evidence I had compiled: the fraudulent expense reports, Cassandra's unauthorized access to sensitive systems, the gradual transfer of client relationships, and Damien's attempts to redefine my role within the company we had built together. "This is quite serious, Victoria. What you're describing isn't just marital infidelity, it's potential embezzlement and corporate malfeasance. The misuse of company funds alone could constitute criminal fraud, particularly given the amounts involved." I had reached the same conclusion during my sleepless night of document review, but hearing it confirmed by someone with Harrison's expertise made the reality more concrete. What I need to understand is this. If I decide to end my business relationship with Damien, what are my options for protecting my investment and maintaining control of the company? Harrison pulled out a thick file containing all the legal documents related to Hamilton and Associates, spreading the various agreements and amendments across his desk like a battle plan. For the next 2 hours, we methodically reviewed every aspect of our corporate structure, identifying leverage points and potential vulnerabilities. What emerged was a picture more favorable to my position than I had dared hope. While the 2019 restructuring had indeed given Damien operational control as managing principal, it had also created specific triggers that could activate my dormant authority. Most importantly, any evidence of financial malfeasance or breach of fiduciary duty by the managing principal would automatically restore full decision-making authority to the primary stakeholder, which was me, by virtue of my majority ownership stake. The beauty of this structure, Harrison explained, is that it was designed to protect your investment against exactly this type of situation. Your grandmother insisted on these safeguards when we drafted the original agreements. She was quite specific about ensuring that operational control could never be used to compromise your financial interests. Even in death, my grandmother was still protecting me from the very scenario she had warned me about 8 years earlier. The woman who had built an empire through careful planning and strategic thinking had anticipated that my marriage might someday threaten my business interests, and she had ensured that the legal framework would preserve my ability to act decisively when that moment arrived. But Harrison's most valuable insight wasn't about the corporate structure. It was about timing and execution. If you're going to assert control, Victoria, you need to do it comprehensively and simultaneously. Half measures will only give Damien time to create additional complications or potentially transfer assets beyond your reach. This led to a discussion of what comprehensive action would actually entail. First, I would need to formally document Damien's breach of fiduciary duty, creating an unassailable legal record of his misuse of corporate funds and unauthorized delegation of authority. Second, I would need to simultaneously assert control over all corporate assets, bank accounts, and business relationships before he could react. Third, I would need to secure the physical premises and digital systems to prevent any potential sabotage or data destruction. You're essentially planning a hostile takeover of your own company, Harrison observed, with what might have been admiration. It's possible, but it requires careful coordination and absolute commitment. Once you begin this process, there's no turning back. The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove back to Riverside Valley that evening. No turning back. The woman who had started this day still harbored some fantasy that her marriage might somehow be salvageable, that the evidence she had uncovered might be explained away or forgiven. But the woman returning home understood that forgiveness was a luxury she could no longer afford. I spent the evening researching private investigation services, not because I needed more evidence of Damien's affair. I had plenty. But because I needed professional documentation that would hold up in court. The investigator I ultimately selected, Marcus Sterling, of Sterling Corporate Security, specialized in business fraud cases and had extensive experience with marital dissolution involving significant assets. Mrs. Hamilton, Sterling said when I called his office after hours, based on what you've described, I can have preliminary documentation within 72 hours and a comprehensive report within a week. The key is to gather evidence without alerting your husband to our investigation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now employing the same secretive methods that Damien had been using to conduct his affair. The difference was that my secrecy was designed to protect assets that were legitimately mine, while his had been designed to steal from our shared enterprise. Over the following days, I maintained my normal routine while secretly orchestrating the dismantling of Damien's carefully constructed deception. I attended our Friday staff meeting, smiled pleasantly at Cassandra as she delivered reports that I now knew were designed to gradually assume my responsibilities, and listened to Damien discuss project timelines for developments that might soon be under entirely different management. The hardest part was containing my anger during these performances. Watching Cassandra touch Damien's arm while discussing urgent priority items that required private consultation. Listening to him describe business strategies that relied on relationships I had built and maintained. pretending to appreciate his input on decisions that I was increasingly capable of making without him. But anger, I was learning, could be refined into something more useful than emotional explosion. Each lie Damien told, each inappropriate gesture from Cassandra, each assumption that I would remain passive and trusting, became fuel for the systematic destruction of everything they thought they were building together. Sterling's preliminary report arrived exactly 72 hours later, containing photographic evidence of Damien and Cassandra's relationship that removed any possibility of denial or alternative explanation. Professional surveillance had documented romantic dinners, overnight stays at her apartment, and afternoon encounters at hotels that made their relationship unambiguously clear. More importantly, Sterling had uncovered evidence that their affair extended back at least 10 months, not the 6 I had initially suspected. This earlier timeline meant that Damien had been lying to me far longer than I had realized, and it also meant that Cassandra had been involved in our business operations from almost the moment their personal relationship began. As I reviewed Sterling's documentation in my home office while Damien worked late at yet another fabricated crisis, I felt the final pieces of my strategy clicking into place. I had the legal authority, the documented evidence, and the professional support necessary to reclaim complete control of my business and my life. The only remaining question was when to strike. Harrison had recommended acting during a time when Damien would be least prepared to mount a defense, when his attention would be focused elsewhere, and his support systems would be unavailable. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. In just over a week, Damien and I would be hosting our annual New Year's Eve celebration, the social event that traditionally marked the pinnacle of our professional and personal success. 200 guests, including every important business relationship we had cultivated over 8 years, would gather in our home to toast another successful year. It would be the perfect stage for the final act of our partnership. The week leading up to our New Year's Eve party transformed into an elaborate theater production where I played the role of the unsuspecting wife while orchestrating the most important performance of my life. Every detail of the evening had to appear normal, celebratory, perfect, while secretly serving as the stage for Damien's complete professional and personal destruction. The guest list had been finalized months earlier. Patricia Carlisle and her husband Robert, Mayor Thompson and his wife Jennifer, County Commissioner Patricia Wild, the senior partners from our 3 largest contractor relationships, and the municipal officials whose goodwill had been essential to our success. These weren't just party guests. They were witnesses to the empire we had built together, and they would also be witnesses to how dramatically that empire was about to change hands. I spent Monday afternoon with our event coordinator, Melissa Barnes, reviewing final arrangements for what would officially be the last Hamilton and Associates celebration under Damien's management. The irony was delicious. While Melissa focused on champagne selections and catering timelines, I was simultaneously coordinating with Harrison Whitmore's legal team to ensure that all necessary documentation would be ready for execution at precisely 12:01 a.m. on January 1st. "Victoria, you seem unusually focused on the timing tonight," Melissa observed as we reviewed the evening's schedule. "The champagne toast is traditionally at midnight, but you've specified that it needs to happen at exactly 11:58 p.m. Is there some significance to those extra 2 minutes?" There was indeed significance, though I couldn't explain that I needed the toast completed before midnight so that my legal maneuvers could commence at 12:01 a.m. with maximum dramatic impact. "I just want to ensure we have time for some brief remarks before the countdown," I said smoothly. "Damien has been working on something special to mark the occasion." That much was true, though Damien's special remarks would be considerably different from what he was currently planning. While he believed he would be toasting another successful year of partnership, I would be using those same moments to announce the end of our business relationship and the beginning of his exile from the company he thought he controlled. Tuesday brought a more challenging test of my acting abilities, our final staff meeting before the holiday break. The conference room felt charged with undercurrents that only I seemed to notice. Cassandra sat directly across from me, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her attention focused on Damien with an intensity that would have been obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Martin Rivers, our project manager, presented updates on 3 major developments that would all be under new management within a week. Rachel Chen discussed design timelines that assumed a continuity of leadership that was about to be shattered. Most surreal was watching Damien facilitate the meeting with his usual confident competence, completely unaware that every decision he made was subject to imminent reversal. He assigned responsibilities for January projects that he wouldn't be authorized to oversee. He approved budget allocations that would require my signature to implement. He discussed long-term strategic plans for a company he would no longer be managing. "Victoria," he said, during the discussion of the Oakmont Commons project, "I've been thinking that we should consider expanding Cassandra's role in client relations. She's shown real aptitude for understanding the complex coordination these large projects require." I smiled pleasantly while mentally noting that this would be the last personnel decision Damien would attempt to make unilaterally. "That's an interesting idea. Let's discuss it more thoroughly after the holidays, when we have time to consider all the implications." Cassandra's face lit up with anticipation, clearly interpreting this as encouragement for her expanded role within the company. She had no idea that by the time we reconvened in January, her employment with Hamilton and Associates would be terminated, along with any access to confidential business information that she had been sharing with Damien. Wednesday afternoon brought the arrival of Sterling's comprehensive investigation report, delivered to my office in an unmarked envelope while Damien was conducting a client site visit with, according to his calendar, a contractor who had no record of scheduling any such meeting. The document was devastating in its thoroughness. Detailed surveillance logs, photographs spanning several months, financial analysis of corporate account abuse, and expert testimony about the systematic nature of the deception. Most damning was Sterling's discovery of text message exchanges between Damien and Cassandra that had been archived on our corporate server, communications that revealed not just the intimate nature of their relationship, but their discussions about gradually marginalizing my role in the business. In one particularly incriminating exchange from November, Damien had written, "Victoria is too trusting to notice what we're building here. By next summer, she'll be lucky if she still has an office." Reading those words, I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. This wasn't just about an affair or even about financial fraud. Damien had been actively planning to force me out of the company I had created and funded, treating my contributions as obstacles to overcome rather than partnerships to honor. The casual cruelty of his dismissal, the calculated nature of his manipulation, removed any lingering doubt about the appropriateness of my response. Thursday evening provided the final test of my composure when Damien suggested we should, quote, "take some time to discuss our goals for the new year, over dinner at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where we had celebrated every major milestone in our relationship." The location choice felt like a deliberate mockery, though I doubted Damien was sophisticated enough to have planned it as such. "I've been thinking about what you said regarding Cassandra's expanded role," he began over our appetizers, his tone suggesting this was a casual conversation rather than a strategic discussion. "I really believe she could take over much of the day-to-day operational oversight, which would free you up to focus on the creative aspects of interior design that you're so passionate about." The proposal was elegant in its manipulation, framing my demotion as an opportunity for creative fulfillment rather than acknowledging it as a systematic reduction of my authority. In Damien's revised vision of our partnership, I would become a specialized consultant, while he and Cassandra assumed control of the business empire that my money had built. "That's a significant organizational change," I replied carefully. "Have you given thought to how such a restructuring would affect our client relationships? Many of our biggest accounts work with us specifically because of the personal attention I provide." Damien waved dismissively, cutting into his steak with casual confidence. "Patricia Carlisle, for instance, adores you personally, but she ultimately chooses Hamilton and Associates because of our architectural vision and project management capabilities. With Cassandra handling more of the operational details, we could actually serve our clients more efficiently." I nodded thoughtfully, as if seriously considering this proposal to make myself redundant in my own company. "You've clearly given this considerable thought. Perhaps we should table this discussion until after the party, when we can really focus on the implications." Friday morning brought the final preparations, confirming that all legal documents were prepared and ready for execution, ensuring that Sterling's investigation team would be available for any additional documentation needed, and coordinating with Harrison's office to guarantee that the necessary personnel would be standing by despite the holiday timing. The beautiful absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on me as I spent Friday afternoon arranging flowers and reviewing catering details for a party that would effectively serve as Damien's farewell celebration. Every elegant touch, the imported champagne, the professional lighting, the live jazz quartet, was being funded by the same corporate accounts that Damien had been systematically abusing to finance his affair. That evening, as I dressed for our New Year's Eve celebration in a stunning navy blue gown that Damien had complimented when I purchased it 6 months earlier, I caught my reflection in our bedroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was polished, confident, beautiful, and absolutely lethal in her determination. In 12 hours, the life I had been living would cease to exist. The marriage built on lies, the business partnership corrupted by betrayal, the comfortable illusions that had sustained 8 years of what I had believed was shared success. All of it would be swept away by the legal tsunami I had carefully prepared. But as I applied the last touches of makeup and fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace around my throat, I felt no sadness for what was ending. Only anticipation for what was about to begin. The countdown to midnight had started, and I was ready. The first guests arrived at our Millbrook estate precisely at 8 o'clock, their luxury vehicles winding up the circular driveway toward the Georgian mansion that had been my grandmother's wedding gift to us 8 years earlier. From the grand foyer, I watched Mayor Thompson and his wife emerge from their black Mercedes, followed closely by Patricia Carlisle in her signature silver Bentley. Each arrival represented another witness to what would unfold over the next 4 hours. The ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland of crystal and silver, with towering floral arrangements that had cost more than most people's monthly salaries. A jazz quartet played sophisticated standards from a small stage near the French doors that led to our snow-dusted gardens. Everything was perfect, elegant, and completely normal, the ideal backdrop for the systematic destruction of my husband's world. Damien moved through the crowd with his usual confident charm, accepting congratulations on another successful year for Hamilton and Associates, completely unaware that he was presiding over his own professional funeral. He wore the navy blue Tom Ford tuxedo I had given him for our 5th anniversary, and he looked every inch the successful architect and businessman that our guests believed him to be. Cassandra had arrived fashionably late at 9:15, stunning in a red silk gown that I recognized from the Nordstrom receipt I'd found among our corporate expenses. She moved through the party with practiced ease, chatting with clients and municipal officials as if she were already a senior partner, rather than an executive assistant conducting an affair with her married boss. The audacity of her performance was almost admirable. "Victoria, darling, what a spectacular evening," Patricia Carlisle said as she approached me near the champagne station. "You and Damien have outdone yourselves once again. The whole county will be talking about this party for months." "Thank you, Patricia. I hope it will indeed be memorable." I smiled, knowing that my words carried a meaning she couldn't possibly understand yet. As the evening progressed, I found myself moving through familiar social rhythms with an strange sense of detachment. Conversations about upcoming projects that would soon be under different management. Toasts to partnerships that would be dissolved within hours. Compliments on our beautiful home that would soon be solely mine again. At 11:30, I excused myself from a conversation with County Commissioner Wild and made my way to Damien's study, where Harrison Whitmore was waiting with a small team of legal assistants. They had entered through the service entrance an hour earlier, and everything was prepared for the midnight transition of power. "Are you ready, Victoria?" Harrison asked, his expression grave but determined. I nodded, feeling surprisingly calm despite the magnitude of what we were about to execute. "All the documentation is complete?" "Everything. The evidence of financial malfeasance, the breach of fiduciary duty findings, the emergency corporate resolutions. It's all been prepared according to the legal framework we established. At 12:01 a.m., you'll have complete operational control of Hamilton and Associates, and Mr. Hamilton will be legally prohibited from making any business decisions without your written authorization." The timing was crucial. While our guests celebrated the arrival of the new year, I would be signing documents that would strip Damien of everything he thought he controlled. By the time the champagne finished bubbling, he would be nothing more than an employee in the company he believed he owned. At 11:55, I returned to the ballroom and moved to the small stage where the jazz quartet had been playing. The microphone felt surprisingly light in my hand as I tapped it gently, drawing the attention of our 200 guests. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The conversations gradually quieted as all eyes turned toward me. As we prepare to welcome the new year, Damien and I wanted to take a moment to reflect on everything we've accomplished together and to share some exciting news about the future of Hamilton and Associates. Damien looked up from his conversation with Martin Rivers, clearly surprised that I was making an announcement he hadn't prepared. But he smiled and began moving toward the stage, probably assuming I was about to introduce some brief remarks from him. This past year has been one of tremendous growth and success for our firm, I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. We've completed projects worth over $100 million, expanded our client base, and strengthened our position as the premier architectural firm in the region. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Patricia Carlisle beamed approvingly, clearly expecting standard corporate celebration rhetoric. But as we look toward the future, it's important to acknowledge that success requires constant evolution and sometimes difficult decisions. I paused, watching Damien's expression shift from confidence to confusion as he realized this wasn't the speech he had expected. Which is why I'm pleased to announce that beginning January 1st, Hamilton and Associates will be operating under new management structure. After careful consideration and legal review, the board has determined that the company requires fresh leadership to achieve its full potential. The murmur that went through the crowd was louder now, more uncertain. Several guests glanced toward Damien, who had stopped moving toward the stage and was staring at me with dawning alarm. Effective at midnight tonight, I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer and Managing Principal of Hamilton and Associates, with full operational authority over all business decisions, client relationships, and personnel matters. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 of the region's most influential people stood frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. Damien's face had gone completely white, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. This transition reflects the company's need to align operational control with actual ownership and financial responsibility, I continued, my voice never wavering. As the primary investor and majority stakeholder in Hamilton and Associates, I believe this change will better serve our clients and ensure the continued success of our firm. Mayor Thompson was the first to break the stunned silence, beginning to applaud slowly. Patricia Carlisle joined him, followed by others who were sophisticated enough to recognize a corporate coup when they witnessed one. Within moments, the entire ballroom was applauding what they now understood was my Declaration of Independence. But I wasn't finished. I should also mention that as part of this reorganization, we'll be implementing new policies regarding the use of corporate resources and the appropriate boundaries between personal and professional relationships. Effective immediately, any employee found to have violated these standards will face termination. Cassandra, who had been standing near the bar, went visibly pale as the implications became clear. Several guests followed my gaze toward her, and I watched her realize that her affair with Damien hadn't been as secret as they had believed. "Now," I said, raising my champagne flute, "let's toast to new beginnings, honest partnerships, and the kind of success that comes from building on solid foundations rather than shifting sand." The countdown to midnight began as I descended from the stage, champagne glass still raised. 10, 9, 8. Damien finally broke from his paralysis and began pushing through the crowd toward me. 7, 6, 5. Cassandra was already moving toward the exit, clearly understanding that her employment had just been terminated in the most public way possible. 4, 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year!" the crowd shouted in unison, as confetti fell from the ceiling and the jazz quartet launched into Auld Lang Syne. At exactly 12:01 a.m., as our guests embraced and celebrated around us, Harrison appeared at my elbow, with a leather portfolio containing the documents that would formalize everything I had just announced. I signed each page methodically, while chaos swirled around me, legally cementing my complete control over the business empire that had always been mine. Damien finally reached me as I was signing the last document, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "Victoria, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just—" "I can, and I have," I interrupted calmly, handing the completed paperwork back to Harrison. "As of 60 seconds ago, you are no longer authorized to make any decisions regarding Hamilton and Associates. Your access to corporate accounts has been suspended, your management authority has been revoked, and your employment status is under review pending a full investigation of your misuse of company resources." "This is insane," he hissed, leaning closer so our conversation wouldn't be overheard by the celebrating guests. "You're destroying everything we built together." "No, Damien, I'm reclaiming everything I built, and you tried to steal." I smiled, the same gracious smile I had worn throughout 8 years of marriage, but now it carried an entirely different meaning. "You should probably call an attorney, and you might want to start looking for new accommodations, since the house is in my name as well." As Damien stood there, speechless for perhaps the first time in our relationship, I turned back to our guests, who were still celebrating what they now understood was my complete victory. Patricia Carlisle approached with her husband, both of them wearing expressions of profound respect. "Victoria," Patricia said quietly, "that was the most impressive display of strategic planning I've witnessed in 30 years of business. Your grandmother would be very proud." She was right. Eleanor Whitmore had always taught me that true power wasn't about making noise or throwing tantrums. It was about controlling the foundation and being patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to assert that control. As the last guest departed in the early hours of January 1st, I stood alone in the ballroom that had served as the stage for my liberation. Damien had left with Cassandra around 1:30, both of them understanding that their presence was no longer welcome in my home or my company. The caterers were cleaning up the remnants of what had been a perfect party, and soon the house would be quiet again. But the silence would be different now. For the first time in 8 years, it would be the silence of complete autonomy, of absolute control over my own life and business. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more gradual erosion of my authority and self-worth. I had celebrated the new year by claiming everything that was rightfully mine.